RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site. You are listening to Warp and Woof Radio. Dr. Mark Eckel, Harold H.B. Bell in the house once again. Dr. Mark, how are you, my friend?
We're doing really well. It's a lovely, lovely day in Indianapolis today.
Excellent, excellent. Man, we have a great topic of discussion for today. And youth is being served in the house, as always. We've got my little intern, Richard Knowles, in the house. But we are honored to have Tucker Krajewski and Adeleine Sinsabaugh. I know that I'm butchering your name, Tucker, and we'll get it right when we introduce you. But today we're going to be talking about inner city neighborhoods and how we can help improve them. And Tucker and Adeleine have some great works that they've been doing around the city of Indianapolis. We're going to fill you in on that. And the second hour of the show, David Cederquist is going to be on from Brookside Community Church.
Yes, he will.
And we're going to explain all the things going on in that great community. So, Mark, after our first interlude, we're going to come right back. We're going to introduce you to these great guests that we have in studio today, and we're going to find out more about what's happening in the cities of Indianapolis. So you stick and stay right here on the Cool Groove site, Warp and Woof Radio on the Cool Groove site. RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site, and we are back warping and woofing on the radio. And as I mentioned before, inner city neighborhoods and how we can help and contribute and get some exposure and information out there. Dr. Mark, each week we come in and sponsored by the Comenius Institute. So first, let's explain to the public who you are, what you do.
All of that. Yeah, absolutely. So our emphasis at Comenius is to make a bridge between high school and college for students in IUPUI, specifically those folks who are Christians, where our view of warp and woof is vertical, horizontal threads that make fabric. That's what that means. And from a Christian vantage point, Colossians 1:17, by him, by Jesus, are all things held together. So our emphasis is in coherence, seeing how everything intersects with everything else, Jesus as the head of all things. And of course, that's why we do what we do here. We're very interdisciplinary. We have all different kinds of folks on, all different kinds of voices on. And frankly, this week, HB, Joanna Taft, from the Harrison Center for the Arts, contacted me yesterday, and she said, hey, I've got a couple of folks here who can really be on the radio again with you, and could we do that? And it was providentially fun, man, to throw this thing together. I think I was up at 3:30 again this morning.
Well, you know what's awesome, and I was saying this off air to them, and, you know, working with young people, man, I am always just excited every time I watch that under 30 population,
Absolutely.
You know, because we do a lot of bickering and murmuring about what's wrong with our young people, and then I see these young people and take it away, man. I mean, we've got some great guests in the house.
Absolutely.
So let them introduce themselves.
Sure, absolutely. So our interest here today on the radio program is reminding us what the Bible says about the church and the community, and specifically now inner city neighborhoods in Indianapolis. Tucker, Adeleine, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. We're really glad you're here. Tell us about yourselves, your family, where you graduated from, high school, your faith and your life experiences which led you to the Harrison Center for the Arts.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us here. I'm Adeleine. I'm the oldest of 5. I live in Fountain Square. I graduated from Heron High School a year or two ago in 2015. I interned for the Harrison Center for the Arts then with a specific artist, and from there I got really turned on to like a journalism path, especially with photojournalism and digital communication. So from there we had the idea for this podcast and convinced Joanna, and that's where we are today.
That's good.
So I live in the South Broad Ripple neighborhood. Graduated from the Oaks and Heron with Adeleine. Also did interning with the Harrison Center in high school. I did that for probably 3 years, doing video work. So I'd make videos for them every month, and got really connected through that. And about a year and a half ago, I think, Adeleine and I started sort of brainstorming what a podcast would look like. And we thought the Harrison Center would be a great place to host it, and like Adeleine said, convinced Joanna that it was a good idea. It took a while, but we convinced her.
Oh, that's good. That's good. And your family?
Yeah, so my dad started Common Ground Christian Church, which is on 46th in Illinois. So I've grown up in that church my whole life.
Great.
So
you have siblings?
I have one sister.
Oh, nice.
She goes to Heron too, and the Oaks.
Great. So the younger sister, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about how your faith impacts all of this, to whatever degree that might be. how does your belief system impact what you're doing right now?
Yeah. I think personally I'm very attracted to the story of Jesus, specifically in how he cares for the sort of underdogs and the people that don't really get a voice in their communities. And I think for us that's partially what Inquiry is about, is going into neighborhoods that don't have a voice, and neighborhoods that have a very bad connotation in a lot of ways, and trying to show the beauty that is actually there, and tell the stories of the people that are there, and that the people are good and that they deserve to be known.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also the idea that, like, it's not really our story to tell. We're just here sort of acting as this medium. Like, they already have a voice, but we just have a better platform because of the Harrison Center. So really trying to let other people do the talking.
Great. So when you think about how you have come to this place, you talked about your connection to the Harrison Center for the Arts in the past, and you talked a little bit about Joanna, and you said something about, I think I phrase it properly, twisting her arm. Was that the proper use of the phrase there?
Right.
So talk about how this came to be, literally, and what it was that you said to her. Hey, Joanna, we have this great idea. How did that all kind of flesh out for you guys?
Well, we had a meeting with her in January, probably, pitching the idea, and she said, great, come back with a prototype, with a pilot. And so I was in Nicaragua at the time, and he was in Chattanooga, so we had to collaborate across countries to create, it was a 5-7 minute pilot that we sent to her, and she said, I like it, let's do it.
Yeah.
So
I think starting off the summer, she told us that she wasn't a fan of the podcast idea at all until we sent her the pilot, so that was really cool.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Good. Well, we won't hold the negative podcast connotation against her at all, by any means, at all. But nonetheless, the idea of your life experiences, let's get to that issue, because obviously you're not doing this out of midair. I mean, you've had this idea, you've had this compulsion, this passion, whatever. Tell everybody how it was that you kind of came to this place, and what experiences really kind of intersected that for you.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think we both really care. We have a heart for the community, especially Indianapolis, because we've both grown up here. And we're connected with the neighborhoods that we are talking about because of working through the Harrison Center. And these are the places that we need to focus on because, like I said, those are the places that need a sort of voice. And so I think that's where our passion comes in.
yeah, I mean, we both have, like, kind of experience already in these different things. It was just specifically putting it into a podcast, so that was really cool. A little bit of experience in journalism and storytelling, and then Tucker obviously has a lot of experience in producing and editing, and again, a little bit in writing and storytelling. So it just sort of was putting it all together into the form of a podcast. That was new, but I think it's gone really well.
It's been really fun.
It has been fun.
All right. So your history then, how you've come to this place is you came right out of high school into internship. Was that correct?
We actually both took gap years.
Okay.
So Adeleine took her gap year in Nicaragua, and I went through Common Ground, and I did Kingdom Living Training School,
Great.
which was sort of a discipleship thing. And then this next year is when we started the internship. So, yeah.
Tell everybody what a gap year is. I'm sure that some people who are listening wouldn't understand what that means.
A gap year is something that is amazing and that every high school graduate should do, I would say. I'm a big advocate for it. Basically, it's taking a year off between high school and college. And so we both filled it with something that was kind of to help us discern what we wanted to do in college. And I think for both of us it was really helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
What was it, Adeleine, for you in Nicaragua that kind of motivated that?
I've spent the last year working with Project Alianza, which is a nonprofit that works in Nicaragua. So they go into the coffee lands, which is one of the main commodities that comes out of Nicaragua, and they go and establish schools on these large coffee estates because oftentimes these kids don't have access to school. So I'm a photographer. I went down to help them with digital communications. So spent a lot of time with these kids and a lot of time photographing, and it was a really amazing experience. It was great to work with them and great to be able to have like real world experience doing what I want to do.
That's great. Another photographer, HB.
Oh, I told you, we just keep continuing to build this infrastructure of medium around here. But I just have a question. The consciousness of under 20-year-old people. When did you start developing this community consciousness, and how do you think that develops? I know it's a twofold question. And how can we bring that into the areas that you guys have gone out to serve? Because that consciousness is what makes neighborhood communities thrive. And how do we develop that in these impoverished areas that you guys are talking about?
Well, in terms of how we both developed that, I would say a lot of that has to do with the schools that we went to, the Oaks Academy and Heron High School, and then also working with the Harrison Center, just having people mentor us that really care and teaching us that it matters to care. And so, I mean, that's, for me, how I've arrived at this, is just in the years having a lot of really great people care about me and care about what I was doing and teach me that's important to care about other people too.
You, Tucker?
Yeah, I mean, same thing. I think Harrison Center has been instrumental in the way that I look at community and change, and it's really cool because they give high school students such a great opportunity to experience what life is like outside of college and what working for a community can do. And even just being around Joanna Taft, it's like she says, like, she'll pull you into anything she's going to and find meetings for you to go to, and they all just work really hard to get us involved. They work really hard to get us to care about our communities, and it's really good.
That's really good. When you stop to think about this, and you stop to think about Joanna, my first thought is, next to the word catalyst in the dictionary, isn't there a picture of Joanna right there? Honestly,
There might be.
Probably.
You know, you talk about her as being one of the primary motivators for you outside of your educational experiences. Talk a little bit about how that personal touch, now coming back into HB's question, how does that then motivate you, or how do you begin to see that change happen through her and then with her, now working with her?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, again, it kind of ties back into this idea of how can we get communities to care about themselves. It's this idea that seeing someone else invest in you and encourages you that you're worth investing in, both as a community and as a person. And it's like, well, if other people care about me, I should care about myself too, and encourages you that what you are doing is valid and worth doing, and that other people should be paying attention to it. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your giftings obviously are bent in a certain way. So is it just kind of a natural outgrowth of, yeah, this is my passion, this is what I've been given to do, and now I'm going into this community and kind of enlarging the scope of the community itself by even asking these kinds of questions? It really seems like that's what you're after there. Would you agree with something like that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
We're going to take a break, Mark, and as I say all the time, the people ask, what's wrong with our young people? And I tell them to look in the mirror, because basically what they're telling us, if we show them love, then they'll receive and reciprocate that love again. So you will be right back. You're listening to Warp and Woof Radio on the RadioNext.TV on the Cool Groove site, and we are back warping and woofing on the radio. Dr. Mark Eckel, man, you know, you hitting it out the park every week, man. Adeleine and Tucker, I'm mesmerized, man, with this greatness and youth, as they say.
That's right, yeah.
Take it away, partner.
Well, we got some important questions here that we've developed really on the fly, because this all happened within the last 24 hours of having you all in here, and we're really glad that you are. So let's just take it from the top. Why did you want to become interns at the Harrison Center for the Arts?
Well, for me, I got connected through a specific artist there. So they have, I don't even know, 30-plus artists in the building. And I was just realizing that maybe photography was something I really wanted to do and not just a hobby. So I connected with the photographer there, and then from there spent a year interning with her, and then ended up working with the City Gallery, which is sort of the office of the Harrison Center.
Okay. And connect folks with the woman that you worked with as a photojournalist and the connection to your gap year.
Yeah, so she ended up introducing me to Project Alianza, which is the nonprofit that I worked for during my year off. And so it's just another example of how the Harrison Center is great for networking and building culture and community. So
Excellent.
Yeah,
Very good.
Yeah, and I've gotten connected in high school doing video, so I kind of spearheaded the video department at the Harrison Center. They provided me with resources to start making videos. I learned from one of the guys that worked at the Harrison Center. He sort of mentored me and taught me. And yeah, I just would come in every week and sort of teach myself more, and yeah, it was a great place to grow and learn.
So you really have a broad base of acceptance. You can do a lot of different things. You have a lot of freedom in how you actually fulfill the gifts you've been given.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's really an important idea, that the freedom of entrepreneurialism is huge, so that you have this broad opportunity, but within the opportunity you have this great opportunity then to interact with lots of different things and have that freedom. That's huge.
yeah, they're really great about, you can, like we did, present an idea such as a podcast, and they'll hear you out, and especially if you're already an intern or have been one in the past, they're willing to work with you and say, okay, you want to do this idea, and this is what we're working on now, how can we make these two things fit? So it's really rare to have an idea turned down there. It might change a lot from what your original idea was, but they're always excited and ready to work with you. Yeah.
Sounds like a breeding ground.
Great ideas.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, let's hit something else here. What got you interested in what you are calling the Inquiry series? And as you answer that particular question, also tell them about Inquiry and where they can go to find it.
Yeah. So we started a year ago. We started talking about ideas for a community podcast, the first sort of place-based podcast in Indianapolis. And there's not really a model like it in anything else. Like, there's no podcasts about the city other than like sports podcasts maybe. So we were really excited to start working on it. And I think originally our vision was a lot more broad than we are now. And that was something that Joanna really helped us with when we came to her. She kind of told us, this is good, but you have a very big vision. And she wanted to help us sort of look at it more practically. And so we've now narrowed it down to working on two neighborhoods, Monon 16 and Maple Crossing, which is the 38th and Illinois intersection. So yeah, we kind of go back and forth each episode between those two.
So when I heard you say something about place-based, say that three times real fast. When you talk about being place-based, what does that mean? Help people to understand what that is.
Yeah, it just means making art or creating specifically about a place. So our podcast is inspired and about Indy, therefore it's place-based.
Okay, so it's just about Indianapolis, but in this particular case, you're talking about two really kind of microcosms of Indianapolis?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And you came to choose those based on what?
So 38th and Illinois is a great place. And so because of how the Harrison Center is involved with great places, we're working with that. And so there's actually a lot of really big sort of creative ideas that are happening on 38th and Illinois. And there's a big push for art being there and really just more traffic and more activity. And so this podcast is kind of one of those parts.
Yeah.
And then with Monon 16, it's part of the Promise Zone. So again, that's how that's connected. Just finding places that are connected to community development, and then
Okay. So you've used two phrases again that need to kind of be expanded on here. Tell us about what these great places are, and who gets to decide what is a great place, and then of course the Promise Zone. What are these two places? Kind of help us to understand what those are.
Yeah, so Great Places is a city initiative where they've picked 3 different neighborhoods, and they're getting a lot of extra attention and I believe extra funding too for people like the Harrison Center or Kepra to like come in and start working in these communities, especially around like art initiatives. So for the Harrison Center, it's all culminating at 38th and Shine, which is this huge project of trying to beat the world record for most sparklers lit at once. It's happening in August. It's going to be really fun. We're really excited about it. And then the Promise Zone is a federal initiative that just places extra attention on neighborhoods, and I believe it's practically the whole east side of Indianapolis.
Yeah.
But it's, again, same idea. These are neighborhoods that are right on the brink and just sort of need that extra push.
Okay.
And so it's just a way of providing that.
All right. So when we talk about the issue of place, this is huge because everybody lives in a place, and we care about our place. And so if we can get other people to care about their places, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah. Kind of like what we talked about earlier. One thing I want to know real quick is when you were talking to the people in your podcast in those areas that they're redeveloping, how involved are they, and do they even know what's coming? Because I'm telling you, that 38th in Illinois, where that red line now is coming, what's the marketplace going to be like for some of the young artists, some of those people in that neighborhood, to be able to participate and have some economic development in that neighborhood?
Yeah, I would say it really varies on the people we talk to, what they sort of can see and understand what's happening. I would say on 38th in Illinois, pretty much all the business owners we've talked to are very aware of the changes happening and very excited about them. I would also say every time we've talked to them. Yeah, some more than others, but they all have a good understanding of each other, I think, and they all sort of know where each other works and what they do and have some sort of interaction. And so the people we've talked to are really excited for the change that's happening, I think, and are excited to see the neighborhood grow.
Yeah, Monon 16 is really interesting because from just walking around and talking to people that were there, we could begin to pull out some of the change that's going to take place, but not really. It was talking to the people that are like buying up the buildings that was like, oh, this is happening. So it just sort of depends. Like each neighborhood is different, so it just depends on the neighborhood and how it's playing out.
All right. So here's another question, or at least kind of help us to understand this. Your podcasts remind me specifically of a cross between an NPR interview, a Moth Radio Hour episode, and if you're not familiar with that, those of you who are listening, go check them out, and an intersection of nouveau music, and that can be expanded in lots of different directions. But I want you to explain to the folks how you put these podcasts together. What did you want to communicate, and why did you decide to communicate the way you did?
Yeah, so we are sort of still figuring out the process that we use. We've only been really working on this for 3 weeks. So I think typically the beginning of the week is Adeleine will sort of work on the outline and the general overview of what episode we're going to do. Like I said, we kind of alternate between 30th in Illinois and 16 Monon. So we work on the outline and overview in the first sort of half of the week. We try to record around Wednesday or Thursday and get an interview in with at least one person and sort of use that as the basis of the story. And then generally on Thursday or Friday, I'll edit, and Adeleine will kind of start to brainstorm the next week. So, yeah, it's a pretty quick turnover.
Nice.
Yeah.
Do you have specific directions that you are already thinking about for your next podcast? Do you kind of anticipate these and plan ahead?
Next episode, yeah. It is very much a week-by-week basis, which is sort of a cool aspect of it, is that whoever's listening, they can discover these neighborhoods with us. But we do have an idea of who we want to talk to, and the direction of episode 4, we already know where we want that to go, and even beyond that into the next episodes, we have an idea of where we want that to go.
So when I first asked the question, I talked about the connection between NPR and Moth and so on. Were you actually thinking about that as you were creating these things? Speak to that issue.
Yeah, I would say I think both of us are pretty big podcast listeners. So podcasts like that are on the NPR network are a huge inspiration for both of us, and definitely a very pioneering force in the general radio broadcasting area. So a huge inspiration, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, your verbal images to me are fascinating. For instance, in the 3rd episode of Inquiry, I've listened to all 3 of your episodes so far, you tell the story of Mapleton, and you go all the way back to start your overview in 1840. So here is just one piece that I picked up on. This is a quote that I have from your podcast. Here it is, quote, "Travelers heading north from Indianapolis, just 3 miles south, were known to stop in Mapleton before continuing on to the town of Broad Ripple. It's a little crazy to think of a time when Indianapolis was so small that Broad Ripple was a separate town. so far away that people decided to rest in Mapleton before continuing the journey, end quote. Now, it's obvious how much things have changed in Indianapolis and how much homework you have done. So explain how you did your research leading into these podcasts.
We talk about a little bit in the podcast. We do a little bit of internet research, so finding older documents or people that have done more research than we have, so places like IUPUI that have the money to really go into these, and then a little bit of city records or older history books about Indianapolis. But the main way, especially for more recent history that we found, is to talk to the people that are in these neighborhoods, especially in 38th and Illinois, because these business owners have been there for a really long time, 30 plus years. So they, especially the more recent changes, have really lived through that, and a lot of the residents have been there for a while as well. And so our main way of figuring out what's happened and changed is to talk to as many people as possible and try and pull out the story of what's happened and changed.
Great. Okay, well, let me ask a further question, since we're talking about these narratives that you're kind of brewing about. I was fascinated as I listened that you made this statement. Quote, our research needs predated Google. I'll say that again. Our research needs, that is your needs for research, predated Google. So talk about the importance of what we refer to as historiography in the form of personal interviews, and why the internet is limited for research purposes.
Well, in this situation, again, we've talked about it a little bit before, these communities are so small. It's literally a couple blocks, or 38th in Illinois, half a block of communities. So if it was the larger neighborhood, it would probably be easier to find the things that we're looking for on through Google and through the city records that are uploaded there. But for the most part, since it's so small, it's really hard to find things that are specific to this tiny little bit of a neighborhood. So that's a huge problem. And then on top of that, for episode 3, when we were really trying to see the change that's happened from 1950 to now, those city records haven't necessarily been put onto the internet, and then it's really hard to gain access to them. And then again, especially maybe for the larger neighborhood, but specifically looking for these tiny little intersections, it's difficult. So again, we decided that maybe a more effective way would again to go to the business owners there and to the residents, and then just use their story and talk to everyone and just try and corroborate our story with as many different people as possible to gain the truth of what had happened.
Okay.
So.
All right. Part of what we're dealing with here, and part of my question actually, is about how technology, we talk about technology as this noun that kind of encompasses everything, but quite frankly, the doorknob is technology. So when we think about technology, though, we often think about computers and going on the net and finding different ideas and social media and so on. But what I'm finding here in your podcast, and what you're finding, is that technology doesn't make it, man. You need some history. So talk to us a little bit about the necessity of libraries and real hard copy research. Talk a little bit about the necessity of that.
I mean, yeah, it is important. We've gone through, there's the Indianapolis Now and Then books. I don't know if you've ever looked at them, but they're really interesting. But yeah, there's a lot of books and a lot of really interesting writing that's been done about Indianapolis that is specific to books, a lot of times from professors from IUPUI or something like that, that haven't made it onto the internet because it's a giant book. So there's a lot of importance for that, especially if you're wanting to do really in-depth, very specific research. It's oftentimes more helpful to go to a bigger library where you can say, oh no, okay, this is the rabbit trail I need to follow, and then get right up and go find that book. So.
Yeah. Okay. We found a sociology textbook that actually uses 38th in Illinois as an example.
Oh, great.
In one of the chapters. And so things like that we just can't find on the internet.
Sure.
And the only way to find them really is to just look through books.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah.
Books. How
yeah,
about that?
Right.
Remember those?
Yeah, exactly right.
Let me say
Go
this
ahead,
real
go
quick.
ahead.
It's interesting that you're talking about history not being documented on the internet. And I was doing some research and found out that African Americans over 65, only 28% of them use the internet. Mm-hmm. So the exchange probably is, if you're not using it, it's not going to be compiled in data to put on the internet. And the areas that you were going to do your interviewing and your podcast in were primarily old African Americans who lived there.
Yeah.
And so that dynamic is real.
Yeah.
And we talk about it all the time, how information isn't transferred because of the lack of people knowing how to use the tools of today. So I just had to say that.
No, that's really important. And I think sometimes, here we are sitting, a couple of late 50-year-olds sitting at the table with a couple of 20-somethings. And when we're talking about these kinds of things, there's this interconnectivity that I think is even happening at this table, so that we're saying to you, look, the folks that you're even interviewing, here's the stat on them. They don't even go to the net. They don't have a clue what that is. And so their stories are so much more powerful that way when you stop to consider what that means for you and what you're doing.
Yeah.
Well, let me take this a little bit further. You mentioned the impact of churches in at least one of your episodes in the development of these little towns. What did you discover about the importance of community and the importance of church, generally speaking?
Well, they're two different neighborhoods, so you kind of have to approach them separately. But if you look at 38th and Illinois, and again, having just recently gone back through the history of that intersection, but the larger neighborhoods that are there, there's a lot of church influence that you can see. And then for us, working within 38th and Illinois, that church owns that northeast quadrant of the block, and they have a lot of really great programs that they're running through that. Soup Kitchen is one of the more common ones that you see, but a lot of really interesting community involvement. But in terms of the importance of community, I mean, it's just really important.
Yeah.
I mean, you could go on and on and on about it, but it's important in terms of like the community's investment, where the neighborhood will go. It's important in terms of, again, like the idea of safety and security and investing in the businesses that are there. And each of those two different neighborhoods is really different vibes and feelings to them because of the two different communities that are there.
And here you have these churches, though, that are planted there. So the importance of the church being there, I mean, I'm talking about a physical place there, is huge, right, for this community, is what you're suggesting?
It is. It absolutely does. And I think it, like Adeleine says, it changes the community when it's there. And we see people going in and out every day. And I mean, if you talk about the 30th and Illinois intersection, you have to talk about the church that's across the street because they are so involved.
Good.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Well, let's take that idea of change a little bit further. You mentioned the word or the idea of change quite a bit in one form or another all the way through at least these first three podcasts. For instance, here's one line that you mentioned, quote, "Change is the mark of time, and without it, no growth exists," end quote. Change is the mark of time, and without it, no growth exists. So during your work, have you come to a theology or a philosophy of change? Have you kind of garnered some definition or maybe some attributes or some values of change? What does that mean?
Yeah, so I think, at least for myself, I walked into this not expecting to find what I did find about change. I saw it in a much more one-sided way, I think, and I learned that change is a lot more complicated than I thought. And even in the past 3 or 4 weeks, just talking to people, we're talking directly to people who are on the receiving end of the change, and we're talking to people who are making the change happen. And so we see the positive and negatives of that change, and it's just, if anything, my definition has just completely expanded when talking about change in a community.
Good.
Yeah, the idea of what it looks like for a neighborhood or community to change, just the idea of change in general has really grown a lot. And again, like that idea, I've kind of come to the conclusion that it's necessary, and while it's really uncomfortable and can sometimes be really bad, but there's no opportunity for growth without it at all. So.
Okay. All right. Uncomfortable and complicated. When we talk about change, this is a big deal.
Absolutely, and we always say it: no friction, no movement.
That's right.
And so
That's
change is necessary to make things better. So we're going to take a short break and come back. Tucker and Adeleine are putting it down. So you tell somebody to tell somebody. This is Warp and Woof Radio.
All right.
Cool Groove site. RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site, Warp and Woof Radio. Almost finished with this first hour, and man, this is intriguing.
It is.
Loving the perspective of eyes from a younger generation.
That's right.
Especially when I've seen these changes happen, and listening to it is just so intriguing. But Lori Davis, we know you're down there in Chattanooga listening in. Proud of your big guy up here. And Mother Eckel, I'd be remiss if I did not say hello to you as well.
Hi, Mom.
And we're back. We're gonna close this segment with Adeleine and Tucker.
Well, we just want to make sure to finalize this in the right way. And as I was listening to your inquiry series, it kind of hit me that obviously you're working together on this thing. So talk a bit about how you work together, what it takes to collaborate so closely, and how you come to agreement for how each show runs.
Yeah, we've worked together on a few different projects before. We've known each other for a really long time, so that definitely helps. But I tend to do a lot of the writing and research, and Tucker does a lot of the producing and editing, and we both pitch in on everything. There have been times where I've sat down and pulled out interview clips on Logic, and times where he's done the writing, and we both go out into the field together. We both, whenever we're out in these neighborhoods, we're walking around and interviewing, and yeah, it's just sort of all hands on deck. Everyone does everything.
That's good.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah, it's good. It's a very impromptu sort of thing. We trade off, and we have to be flexible each week.
Yeah, we definitely have skills that complement each other well.
That's good.
That works out nicely.
If you were going to leave the listeners with any final story or any final ideas about anything, what would they be from both of you?
Yeah, I think we want people to listen to Inquiry, so and help us out. I think we were talking earlier that we kind of would love to have guests on. We would love to hear ideas and keep doing what we're doing. So you can listen on iTunes and SoundCloud and just search for Inquiry Podcast.
Yeah. You can come talk to us at the Harrison Center. Pretty much there, 9 to 5,
Yeah.
Monday through Friday. So.
Okay. All right, so they're going to go to SoundCloud. They're going to look up Inquiry, just that word.
It's probably easier to find it through iTunes.
Okay, find it through iTunes. So one way or the other, we're going to get to you guys and hear those wonderful podcasts out of Indianapolis. Really, honestly, this has been great. Thank you ever so much for being with us here today. Thanks for taking the time. And Joanna, if you're listening, thank you so much for reaching out and making this thing possible. HB, this is the generation that's going to follow us, man.
Hey, they're doing it.
They're doing it.
Doing it well, I might say. And thank you guys, and continue the great work.
Absolutely. So we're going to go to break, and when we come back, David Cederquist from Brookside Community Church going to talk to us about some of their initiatives down there off 10th Street on Olney, and we're looking forward to having David on the show. So take it away, HB. We got a bit of a music break here, don't we?
RadioNext.tv on the Cool Groove site. You're listening to Warp and Woof Radio. Dr. Mark Eckel, Harold H.B. Bell, every Wednesday. Show sponsored by Comenius Institute. 10 o'clock a.m., 12 o'clock p.m. You can catch us here. Man, that first hour was unbelievable. And I tell you all the time, and I don't care if people get tired of me saying it, our young people are fascinating. We just have to put something in them.
That's right.
And you heard, they said it.
Yeah.
They watch, they learn, and it motivates them to go show how to give and love. So they said it, we didn't say it. And we're going to continue this great 2-hour power hour with Mr. David Cederquist, pastor over at the Brookside Community Church. And Mark, introduce your guest to us.
Sure. This is a powerful day because we want to really focus our attention on inner city ministries in particular and community involvement in those particular areas. So Dave, welcome to the show. Tell us about yourself, your family, your life experiences, which really have brought you to Brookside.
Yeah, so I'm a Midwesterner from Michigan, north of Grand Rapids. Grew up in a small town and never really expected to ended up loving the city like I do. Went to college and seminary in 3 different states. I've been around, and then while we were in Philadelphia during seminary, I was kind of insecure about the resume process for getting a church and pastoring at a church, and joined a church planting team in Denver, Colorado, to plant an urban, multi-ethnic church in one of the most impoverished neighborhoods and gang-riddled neighborhoods in Denver, and joined a church planting team to just do church, and learned a ton while we were at it. But what we learned while we were in Denver was that God was actually changing us in the process of church planting. There was a lot of prejudices and pride and sin in my own life that really brought us to a very humbling point as we ministered to the poor in Denver. And through church planting with a group of guys and some Christians striving towards a multi-ethnic ministry, I fell in love with multiple people that came into life with many different struggles. People that were previously incarcerated. I had friends that were murderers and thieves and sex offenders, and grew to love them not by what they did, but by who they were and what their name was. And learned that God is not a God of partiality. He's a God that brings us together in life as we strive towards Him. And so our time started to wind down in Denver, and we really just prayed about what God would have for us, because church planning was what we did in Denver, but it was also a struggle raising support, and striving to be a support-based ministry is really difficult. And a lot of times we had difficulties just keeping up our support raising over the 5 years that we were there. And we just pray, God, if it would be your will for us to be in an underserved, poor neighborhood, may it be. And so through a year process of transition and leaving the ministry that we went there to serve, God opened up a door for us to come to Indianapolis. We did not expect it this way, but Brookside Community Church is an initiative that started in about 2007 by Northview Church. They realized that internationally they were doing some really great work, but when it came down to inner city, there were major problems within the city of Indianapolis. And they wanted to start a local initiative. And so they gathered a group of people, started a Saturday morning initiative in Brookside Park at the community center. And it just began to build traction. A lot of the neighborhood were there. They were feeding them, they were clothing them, they were building relationships. Some of the access to the community center started to decrease, and they found a large building within Brookside neighborhood that we currently are at, and they asked this Methodist church if they could come in and use their gymnasium. And a lot of people that grew up in Brookside neighborhood have played in our gymnasium, which is amazing. But God brought them to end up buying the building. There was a lot of work that needed to be done, and they funded the resources to be able to get this building up and running. And through Brookside Community Church's beginnings, they didn't know it would be a church, but it kind of happened upon becoming a church. And so what's interesting about Brookside Community Church is it started impoverished. It started not with much affluency outside of those who were coming down and trying to serve. And I don't know about you, but how I started in urban ministry was we made a lot of mistakes. I think a lot of times we come in with our privilege and we assume a lot of things on the poor. But one thing that God humbled us a lot in Denver was we realized that we really didn't know a ton, and we assumed too much in our privilege. And we actually hurt a lot of people in the process. But in those hurts, what's amazing and resilient about the underserved poor communities that I have been in is that they're very forgiving and grace-giving. Unlike a lot of privileged settings that I've been in, there is much forgiveness and a desire to allow us to help them in a tangible way. And they want to be part of the greater things of the neighborhood. And so God, through a lot of different leadership changes, Northview decided to do a national search for a pastor. My wife found the post while I was at my job one day, and I remember her reading the post to me over the phone while I was driving, going to dig a hole for a 50-foot flagpole that I was going to try to install. And she was like, "David, this is you." And I said, I want to apply for this position, this pastoral position. And walking through the process, it took about 4 months. I was number 3 on the list, and they got to my name and they interviewed me, and lo and behold, God had it that just a couple months later I'd become the pastor of Brookside Community Church. And when I got there, Northview Church has never given up on Brookside or the Brookside Community Church. They have always been steadfast in their support. And what's amazing about the story of Brookside is that is the reason why God is blessing so well. Because I think that a lot of times we think that we have to have everything figured out right in church. That's how we church plant. We want to have the best research. We want to have the best people. We want to do it right the first time. And the story of Brookside Community Church is just straight up, out of our brokenness, God is making new life. And in the process of making a lot of mistakes, and when I came in, we were at the end of a lot of the mistakes of Brookside Community Church. And I have made enough mistakes, and it seemed like the board and me were kind of done making mistakes in urban ministry and desiring to seek the will of God in Brookside. And it brought us now today where I once sat with me and Liz, who was my assistant. We now have 9 staff members, and we are thriving in ministry, and doing it in spite of the brokenness that is there in our neighborhood and also in our own lives. And so I have a family. I'd like to explain, since that's part of the question. I have a beautiful wife. We've been married for 12 years this December. We have 4 kids that keep us very busy, 6, 4, 2, and not 1, but 1 at next month. And we work together in ministry. My wife works as my executive assistant and the ministry's executive assistant 2 days a week. And we are just loving what God is doing in and through Brookside Community Church, and it continues to keep us humbled and seeking the will of the Father always. And we're just thankful that we can help lead what God is doing in Brookside Community Church.
You know, when I hear you say, this is magnificent. You've laid this wonderful groundwork for us to not only understand you, but Brookside specifically, a very poor neighborhood. Would you agree, generally speaking?
Yeah, 60% of the kids in our neighborhood live in poverty.
Okay. So this is, when you are talking about this word, and the word that stood out to me in all of what you just said was the word brokenness. So how do we begin, as those who have privilege or more privileges than those who are poor, how do we begin to understand our own brokenness before we go to those who are in a poverty setting such as the one you're in now?
Yeah, I think Jesus, from the very beginning of his ministry, even with the rich young ruler, and even his disciples, he always spoke of denying self. And I think within privilege, unfortunately, we get the idea that we have figured out something about life, and so we can actually answer a lot of life's questions. But if you're a Jesus follower, he speaks of denying self more than applying self. He speaks of allowing, because even Paul spoke of, in our weakness we are strong. And that weakness is the brokenness of our life, the people who hurt us and who have abused us and who have neglected us. And all of those feelings and all of those experiences, God says, I am everything for you, and that's why you're strong. And I think that when it comes down to privilege, the reason why you got there, you think it was you, oftentimes. But it's not you. There's a lot of people involved in the privileged status that I have. Not just the skin color that I have, but the sheer protection of my parents, of being there and saying, don't speak like that to people, because that's disrespectful. I was protected in a lot of ways by my own parents. And then we get this idea that we're doing it, and that's where privilege gets it wrong. And I think that humanity, particularly in our brokenness and in our depravity, when we are successful in the world's eyes, we start to think that we are doing it. But when we get in a context that's uncomfortable, particularly like my neighborhood, we are one of the 6 hotspots in Indianapolis. IMPD has marked us as a place where they're going to throw their extra 150 police officers and 800 guys and come back out of the 5,000 that are incarcerated, returning back to Marion County, come to my zip code. We have some of the highest addiction rates, single mothers, 1 in 3. We have a high abandonment rate of housing. We have just disparity like none other. And when we as privilege walk into those scenarios, we think that we can fix it. But the problem is that God never made us him. Mm-hmm. God never made us God. And he has called us to come in and empower. And that's a very difficult place because that is true denial. Because even though I live near the Brookside neighborhood and I live in the neighborhood that I serve in, the difficulty of being there, I am not the answer. I am not the Savior. But in denying myself, I can empower a community with me to be able to be part of the transformation. And that's the beauty of the gospel also, is God, in spite of myself, in spite of my depravity, in spite of my sin, open up an opportunity because of Jesus Christ and a relationship I have with him now. I am in the Father's hands. I am in a reconciled relationship that God originally intended from the very beginning. Adam and Eve had this beautiful relationship, and because of the lie of Satan saying, listen, you're missing something, and what's amazing is when they ate that fruit, they probably sat there and said, I'm waiting to have this newness, this pleasure that was there of being like God, and what they realized was that was never their place. And so the pleasure of sin never really brought about anything for them. It only brought consequences, but therefore we are now this side of heaven and this side of Eden, and we are more depraved than ever. Sure. And so our privilege is part of our depravity, and when we realize that our privilege gets in the way of helping others, we actually appreciate the brokenness of our lives, and that's where God really begins to take over and do his will.
HP, there are so many passages of Scripture that come to mind, but I just got to mention one before we hit the break, and that is 2 Corinthians 3:5 and 4:5, where Paul says, my confidence is not in myself, but in the one who has made me.
Yes.
And that's huge. So,
we say it all the time, if we could just get out of our way to let God work through us, man, we would be in such better shape.
Yeah.
And, defeating ourselves through ourselves is what we tend to do. But we're going to come right back. Warp and Woof Radio on the Cool Roof. RadioNext.tv on the Cool Roof site, man. And I'll tell you, these off-air conversations, man.
Oh, my word.
We need to do podcasting on those.
I know it.
We're back in
I'm getting hot, man.
I'm telling you, man.
I'm sweating over here, all the stuff we've been talking about. Yeah, the issues that face us in Indianapolis are facing us in every city. It doesn't matter where it is. You always have the two groups of people. You have the group of people who are lording it over to others, and you have those who are being lorded over. And so the real issues that we face here are, what will the people do who have for the people that don't have? And where is the Micah who's going to come in and do this, walk humbly before God and do justice? So we got to get back to this, Dave, and all of the things that you're doing at Brookside. So give us just an overall focus of Brookside Community Church.
Yeah, so I think from the very beginning, Brookside started to be a church for the neighborhood. I think that's why it was originally called a community church, is because they desired that it would be a community church. And if there's one thing I really treasure and love from the very beginning I've been here, is that we do not have an affluent congregation. When people ask me, how's church going, I always pause and most of the time don't have an answer, because it is very hard to explain to people about our congregation, because we have active drug dealers that are in our congregation that feel safe and come and hear the preached word and allow their kids to go to our programming on Sunday morning. We have prostitutes who are functioning as prostitutes and struggle with that and feel safe in our congregation. When someone walks in and they are from the neighborhood and in spite of their brokenness, they walk in and they see their people. And so when people say, tell me about your church, I know that not many people have a context, and so it's most of the time my answer is good, because I never want to try to prove anything to anyone about what we're doing and what God is doing here, and those who come and experience it see something genuine, but also very uncomfortable, because you are putting yourself within a context that. We just had a family meeting this last Sunday, and what we mean by family, we don't do membership at Brookside. I think membership is very difficult within the context of the urban core because of a lot of the church hurt, and I don't know if it works in suburban. I'm sure it does, and I don't think membership's wrong, but we don't do a covenant membership. We believe that if you are faithful attender Brookside, you're serving the body and you're being discipled to Jesus, you are a church member. You're a family member of Brookside. Well, we had about 45 people there, and I counted the families, and out of the 24 families that were there, 13 were stable. Okay? And that's not affluency, that's stable. Yeah. And probably out of those families, it would only be 4 families that would be affluent out of that 13, and 11 were unstable. And so you're talking about a deep divide of brokenness that we are trying to bring in and reconcile. And so our focus really is that we would love God and love our neighbor. I think that's every church's focus, but that everything that we do is an expression of love, not judgment. It is an expression of racial reconciliation. We intentionally have a multi-ethnic staff. Like I intentionally have in leadership, minority leadership. We are walking this thing out, striving to be a church for the people of Brookside, but then creating programming that will give an expression of love to the neighborhood, specifically of safety, because there's a huge trust factor within our neighborhood of churches. Like we get more church hurt than we do anybody. And so when it comes down to Brookside Community Church, we just want to create a platform to bring people into community in a safe way where they can express their brokenness in a safe sphere. Because it's like my own kids. My own kids, if they don't have the safest place in my home to mess up, then where are they going to mess up? Right. Outside of our home. Yeah. And in the same way, I pray that Brookside Community Church is the place where they sin the most, because I know that it is the safest place for them to work out their brokenness and come into unity with Christ that they could ever be.
Man, I can't ever tell you if I've ever heard a pastor say, church should be where you sin the most. Yeah. That is really something. You heard it here first, folks, on Warp and Woof Radio. Yeah, this is huge. So when you stop to think about prostitutes and drug dealers in your congregation, and doesn't that sound vaguely like Jesus, that kind of idea? Yeah. So take us down the road a little bit further. Brookside, and by the way, those of you listening are going to hear the podcast, go to bccindy.org. That's Brookside Community Church, bccindy.org, and check out all of this wonderful stuff they have on their website. But talk to us about your vision statement and unpack the major ideas of that vision for us.
Yeah, so our vision statement is that we are a family being formed by Christ out of the brokenness and into unity and new life. The gospel is sin exposed, grace abounding. And exposure is not that you know that I'm a prostitute. Exposure is coming into the light and being real with who you are. I am a prostitute. I am proud. I am envious. I am a thief. I do steal joy. I am a control freak. And when it comes down to the context of the church, we create, unfortunately, a very huge dichotomy of perfectionism that does not allow for light to be seen. Because when you're brought into the light, there's a realization that the Holy Spirit gives you, and there's this inherent need for something greater, and that is Jesus.
Yes.
And so we talk about brokenness all the time because we are okay with it. Some people that come to our church and visit, they're very uncomfortable with how raw and real we are because they're not as raw and real in their own lives. And so when it comes down to our neighborhood, though, when it comes to poverty culture and underserved neighborhoods, they're very real with everything. Like you walk down the street and they'll give you more information about themselves, and most of the world would look at it and say, that's too much information. I don't need all that. But that's their life. Right. Because it's raw, it's real. And in the same way, if we're gonna see unity around Jesus in our neighborhood, we have to get raw and real with who we are, because that is the only place that the light of Christ can actually shine down and do the reconciling work that it does and the redemption that is required in all of our lives. And that's where we believe that our hope is in Jesus. And so if we don't create a safe sphere for that, and that's why we talk about brokenness, is that we're being formed by Christ out of our brokenness, because it is exposed. We're already exposed. I mean, what's amazing is tonight, me and my wife, we love doing hospitality, and there's an active drug dealer in our church that is working on reentering his previous cases, and that's how he has provided for his family. And a couple weeks ago, he heard the preaching of the word through Genesis 3 in the fall. And he went up to Charles, my partner, Charles Neal, who helps us with reentry and is working towards eldership in our church. He said, Pastor Charles, preach, he calls him. That's me. Wow. I've lived my whole life being the definer of what is good, right, and evil. And that's what the fall did to us, is when we don't allow God to be the one that is the definer of what is good, right, and evil. We become the deciding factor. We become the God that decides all those things. And I've lived my life with that motto, and I want to be done with that. Wow. And so who knows where God will take this man. We're begging God that we can show him. He might not make as much money as he has, but we're praying that he would come into the light and allow God to show him the hope that he has in him. Yeah. And so that's really what it's about, is allowing the light to be exposed in brokenness and coming together and uniting and creating spheres of opportunity and development. And the world would call it development. We'd call it discipleship and doing life together. And if we can do that, we're just not going to show up in heaven and be surprised anymore. Yeah. We're going to show up to heaven and hopefully see the reality of our brokenness and the gospel lived out here on earth. Then that's kingdom building. So
there you go. So when you're talking about kingdom building, you're talking about building a kingdom with broken people, but this kingdom isn't something that we're building anyway. This is something that somebody else is building, namely Jesus, and that some people come in with church hurt, but really the real issue that you're suggesting here is that sin is being exposed, grace is abounding. And I'm going to be quoting you from now on, man. You are going to be on, your statement is going to be on. No, it's going to be on my lips. Church should be where we sin the most.
The safest place. Yep.
Oh my! This is amazing. When you stop to think, all the list of things you just made, like control freak, I steal people's joy.
Yeah.
Just as bad as prostitution and drug dealing.
Yes.
And but see, people that are in other places, not in places of poverty, don't see it like that.
Right. Exactly.
And there's your dichotomization. There's where you say, we're kind of ranking sin and those kinds of things.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. You got it.
This relationship that you have with Northview is really cool. You talked about that a little bit at the beginning of this, and I want you to kind of flesh this out a little bit more for us in terms of the specific special relationship that you have between the churches in any detailed way that you think is proper.
Yeah, so Northview Church is our family. We are two separate churches on paper. I am governed by our leadership structure, and we are working towards an eldership and a deaconship, and a lot of discipleship has to take place within Brookside for us to be probably the typical biblical church structure. We function a lot like a church plant because the government requires that, and we are praying for more and more character qualified elders, and then we'll install deacons, and we're working through the process, and it could be a 5-year process, and we're being patient. And Northview has their own structure, eldership, but in a sense, our communities come together around the brokenness of our neighborhood, and we are also we're not only financially supported by them, but we are also they intentionally plug their people into ministry in our neighborhood. I don't know about, I can only speak for me, but the gospel became so real to me when I was with people that were in my neighborhood. I now feel more safe in Brookside, even though like the news would expose a lot of unhealth and safety issues and violence and crime. I feel more safe in a neighborhood like Brookside than I would maybe a Carmel. And the gospel has become so real to me because of ministry to the poor. And I know that to be true in my own life, and I desire for that to be for other people. Brookside is a place where churches can plug in not only just Northview, but there are other churches that are connected with us, where if they're, instead of going overseas and doing a mission trip and spending thousands of dollars, why don't you plug into a child's life through mentoring? And we can talk about our programs a little bit later, but ultimately we are a hub for them, for us to be able to do the ministry that we're doing. And in a sense too, we are discipling. We're being part of discipling people towards Christ in unity and all the brokenness that is seen everywhere in all churches. And it allows us to be a family, and how they speak of us as family, how we speak of them as family, in spite of us being separate. And it's a unique relationship, because for two churches to get over themselves and come together and do something together and strive to do something that glorifies God in this city is very difficult, because it takes mutual submission. But what we're seeing with Northview and how they treat us and they love us and they embrace us, but then we also embrace them, God is doing something very special and unique, and it even breaks down my church hurt. And it shows a greater semblance of the kingdom of God as two very different churches and very different missions, to a certain extent, go out and do church. We are united in a way that is very powerful, and it influences us both, how we do ministry. It's amazing how just a small little church like ours can influence a large church like that, but we are influenced by them, and they're influenced by us. And I think that's the beauty of the kingdom happening as we clash together and strive to do ministry for the long haul.
Yeah. This is really a wonderful opportunity to talk about what we always talk about in this show. One of our mantras here is do good, do good, do good, from Titus 3. And our focus really is to bring in folks like yourself who are invested in a community. I want to flip that just for a second and maybe just take a tangent just for a moment and ask you an interesting question. Kind of pops into my mind as you're talking. When you're doing good in a community, like you're doing in Brookside, and the people around you, those people that are propagating the violence, those people that are making the place unsafe, do they look at what you're doing and say to all of their compatriots, hey, lay off those folks, leave them alone, because they're doing something that's good, and we don't want to rip them off, we don't want to hurt them? Have you ever encountered something like that?
Yeah, I think the posture of Brookside Community Church before I came was that we couldn't keep a pastor. Okay? But now that we are actually doing some significant programming within the neighborhood, like we had a guy, I didn't know him from anywhere. I've never met him. He met a 13-year-old girl that was running away from her family. She was a Hispanic girl. She was struggling at school from being bullied in her school, and her parents didn't speak English. And so the dynamic of her parents advocating for her in school was very difficult. And so she just decided to run away, and she actually found a guy online. It was a very dangerous situation. She was at a bus stop on Sherman by our church, and this guy met him. It was this black gentleman who was in his 50s, met this 13-year-old, and he knew there was something wrong. And he goes, follow me. I want to take you somewhere that will help you. And he shows up at our door because he knew that Brookside Community Church would help her.
Wow.
And I'm not sure if I haven't felt a protection of the neighborhood yet. we don't have people trying to break into our building. We have a reentry house down the road. We don't have people trying to rip us off. But I do know that we are starting a testimony within the neighborhood of people looking at us and saying, I see that you help people.
And that story alone.
Yeah.
That story alone is gold as far as I'm concerned, because it does speak to the issue of testimony. It does speak to the issue of doing good. And people will see that and be drawn to it.
Yep.
So talk a little bit about why the church, and by that I mean capital T, capital C, the church, is so important in any culture, and specifically yours on North Olney Street.
Well, the church is where the power of God is seen, right? And if we are not ashamed of the power of God because of the gospel, then the church is the holder, is the message giver of the gospel. And church is people, but if you have a mass of people that are united, yes, individually, we can be the church to a lot of people, right? But if you have a group of people that are so united, but so diverse, right? The proclamation of the gospel is much more powerful than me individually if I come in and submit to a local expression of the body of Christ. And for us to do it together expresses these things. And I'm reminded of 1 Peter 4, where it speaks of, in the first, I think, 6 verses, of our individual responsibility to godliness. But then Peter gets very serious about this corporate expression of what the church is called to. And we are called to prayer, right? Because that is our submission to God, but then also our expression of love for one another. But then also it's seen in our service of one another. And if a church can be as diverse as our church is, and as chaotic as we are, but pray with one another and love and have expressions of love for one another and our neighborhood, but then also serve one another, the church becomes very important for a culture like ours, because there are so many people in our neighborhood who do not trust anyone. If the trust factor in our neighborhood is so low to the point where you could say that you want to do good things and people will praise you, they'll pat you on the back, they'll probably even give you the shirt off their back, right? But they will turn around and go, "We'll see." See what I mean by that?
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah.
And what we're finding is that as we express these 1 Peter 4 values of praying with one another, submitting to one another, loving one another, and we serve one another, what we're seeing the neighborhood go is maybe there's something here and that I can come into and that's safe for me that I've never experienced in the church context. And so the church is critically important. There are other great churches in the neighborhood. I mean, Jim Striedelmeyer at Neighborhood Fellowship, Corey Johnson at Nehemiah Bible Church, Doug Crane at Wallace Street. There are some great churches that are doing some amazing things in the neighborhood. And as we try to unite around the gospel together and try to even collaborate in what we're trying to do, it's going to be amazing to see what God will do at Brookside, because I'm hoping that we don't push the poor out. I'm hoping that we disciple and develop individuals and give them opportunity to change the generational cycle of poverty in our neighborhood, to actually see the gospel even advance further, all because we're doing it together.
It's a powerful thing for you to mention all of these other men. We have a tendency, I think, just in leadership in general, to think that, this is my show, I don't want to share it with anybody else. But Jim Striedelmeyer's been on our show before. He's coming back again in August. I know you guys are friends, and that's a really powerful thing. I know that you were just talking about doing some ministries in your neighborhood, and I'd like to have you flesh out 2 of them. One of them is the Summer Initiative on Play, and I want you to explain why Brookside did this, and then how is it going. And then you also have a reentry program that you've instituted through the Isaiah House. So there's the twofold issue of being engaged in the community. Tell us about those things.
Yeah, so Play, what's great about Brookside Community Play, we're kind of branding it as after-school programs traditionally in our neighborhood are educationally based. And so when it comes to after-school programs, there's a lot of grant funding and things that allow for educationally based programs to be in the neighborhood. But the struggle with them is they're not turning the needle with the educational issues in our neighborhood. And so I did some research, and honestly, I watched a documentary. That's how I came about on it. I am not a youth pastor. I bet you kids and teens would hate me being the leader of them. That's not my category. And so as praying through, knowing that we need to do youth development in our neighborhood, and there's a gap of youth development, and how do you approach a youth in a safe manner to bring them in a safe context for them to be developed. I was not seeing that the after-school programs in our neighborhood were really pushing the needle like we could. And with the FamLip at Northview, we have a lot of volunteerism, a lot of people that desire to serve the city in a healthy manner that doesn't hurt the neighborhood. And so thinking outside the box, I was watching this documentary called Chicagoland, and it follows Emmanuel Rahm, the mayor, the chief of police, and this principal at Farragut High School. And there was this one guy that showed up. His name was Rob, from this organization called Beyond the Ball. And he talked about how sports-based youth development has become significant in his neighborhood, to where the concept and the power of play is actually more effective in transforming a child than any other approach. And so I called Rob up the next day and I said, bro, I need 3 hours of your ear, and we need to chat, because what is this play thing going on? And he pointed me to an organization called Up to Us in Boston that is a shareholder of a lot of intellectual data about play in urban core and how it transforms a child, especially a child with trauma. And a child with trauma would be anybody that has experienced hunger, abandonment, sexual, physical, emotional abuse, all of these different issues that 95% of my kids in my neighborhood have experienced. They all experience trauma-based experiences in their life, and they are adverse to their life. And the power of play is seen, and it's threefold. It is seen when there's a caring adult relationship in their life. They call it coach-mentor. Sports-based youth development calls it coach-mentor. Secondly, if there is this peer connectedness. In education, it's very individually based, so it's about your performance, right? But in sports, it's about our performance. It's about our team performing together. And as they connect around basketball or soccer or whatever, what happens is they see this peer connectedness, and there is relational pieces that transforms a child in the process, especially character building. But then if you institute intentional character development, that is the key to the power of play. And if there's one thing that sports does, is it does create an atmosphere of character development. And so I said, play is the way we need to go. Sports is the way we need to go, I originally said. But then I was talking to Rob, and I said, if you could do anything different in the ministry that you've been doing for 10 years now, what would you do? And he said, we struggle getting girls involved because we are only sports related. Okay. And he said, if you can get around the sports related and expand your territory and get girls involved intentionally, you'll be more effective in what you're doing. And so we changed it from like Brookside Community, sports based, it's to now play based, and we're implementing STEM related pieces like coding, robotics. We're going to do cheerleading in the fall, and all of these character building. And so basically, we're creating spheres of character building settings around sports and play. And it launched in June, where we do the summer play initiative in the park, Brookside Community Park. We host 11 different events. It's from 5 to 8 on Tuesday night. And in the month of June and July, we host about 250 people have been coming out every single night. Last night, we had about 250 people out. Wow. And we're just hosting peer play. That's all it is. And then what that will lead us into is programming where kids will sign up for an 8-week program, 2 days a week, where they will sign up for basketball or coding or cheerleading or junior Lego League or robotics, to where they can come and they can learn the skill of all of these pieces, like the engineering pieces of putting a robot together or the skills of basketball, and they'll be united around a team. They will have a connected, they will have a caring adult relationship, which we'll call a coach-mentor, and we're praying that God would start to begin a safe atmosphere for us to build a relationship with kids and see them discipled and developed and give them hope for their future, to get not out of their situation, but develop them to be a transforming agent in the neighborhood. And if we can see that happen, we think that play is going to be a significant portion of the development of our neighborhood, and we're hoping that I think we're just hoping that we can facilitate it, because not a lot of people want to spend 8 weeks with a child 2 days a week, and it's an after-school program, so people have to be there at 4:30, and so we're praying that God would give us the 40 coach mentors that we need to host 80 to 120 kids in the fall, starting in September. And how we're kind of pitching it to a lot of churches is, hey, this is a mission trip. This is you spending time with your 8 kids or 4 kids in coding, because it's a little bit more technical, and your team of kids and developing them over an 8-week process. And we're just praying that God gives us the right people to minister to our kids, and we really do think it's a game changer for us as we seek to build safety within the neighborhood.
This really brings a whole new meaning to the idea of missions, right? This is a huge, big difference.
All out here he's missing is broadcasting.
Yeah, there you
Young
go.
broadcasting training
Yeah,
program.
that's why we need you, Harold.
No, I'm definitely.
Come on, brother.
I'm 100% serious. I
Yeah.
have a curriculum that we call this on, and it's our news is the curriculum, and we teach speech building.
Wow.
We teach research. We teach team building, all through that mechanism.
Wow.
So we'll definitely talk after you leave,
I'd
because
love
if
that.
we could build some young broadcasters
Yes.
around play,
Yes, brother.
powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, it
That would be wonderful. No, it's okay, man.
You can
Jump in
broadcast
anytime.
our tournaments after, because after the 8-week program, there will be a Saturday tournament for our basketball.
That's exactly what I'm
And,
talking about.
yeah, that'd
now
be
their
amazing.
skill will be put to the test.
Yes, that'd be incredible.
Yes.
So, come back to the other major ministry. I mean, you have lots of ministries, obviously, because you have as many ministries as there are people. But when you think about some of the programmatic ministries that you have, one of the big ones that you have now is a reentry program through the Isaiah House. We had Kevin Russell in here some months back. Kevin talked all about that. As a DOC officer, agent of redemption. I like Kevin.
Yes.
Wonderful guy. So tell us about Isaiah House and what that is doing to your community as well.
Yeah, so Isaiah House, when I came here, I just wanted to kind of soak in Brookside and learn and meet as many people as I could. But about 4 months into starting at Brookside, I got a call from Wells Fargo, and they offered us a free house. And I was like, oh, I want a free house. But they said, you need to tell us what you want to do with it. And at that point, we just weren't stable enough to create family development, and housing is a huge issue in our neighborhood, and we'd love to start something soon here. But after thinking about it, I love reentry. Reentry actually single-handedly changed my life in Denver, and I knew that we needed to do reentry, specifically because men and women who are incarcerated, about 800 of them come back to our zip code out of the 5,000 a year that come back to Marion County. And so it's a significant, every mom or sister or anyone in the neighborhood knows of somebody or is connected to someone who is incarcerated in our neighborhood. And so it's an expression of love. And so I pitched this reentry idea. They took it. They gave us the house. And I went back to my board and I said, guys, we got to do something about this now. And God just providentially lined everything up. And 9 months later, we started Isaiah House. It is a program for men. It's a 12-month discipleship program. We provide them an instant job, $9 an hour job that they have for 120 days that will give them a platform to stabilize themselves, receive some income, start paying child support or whatever their responsibilities are, and then get into the workforce after that 120 days. We give them transportation assistance. We give them housing, food assistance. We give them a mentor right away that is not necessarily connected to our church, but in the outside world, and our Northview family provides many of those mentors. And then we provide 4 days of programming to where we assess where these guys are at and walk with them individually in the gifts that God has given them to rehabilitate them to be productive members of society, but then also lovers of Jesus. And a lot of what we're trying to do with Isaiah House and Reentry is that we are the church. And I think that the church offers a significant piece for anyone's life. But the one thing that we don't need to be doing is reproducing things that are in the neighborhood. So we have partnered with 11 different partners who help us with the financial aspect, some of the mindset thinking of reentry. 11 different partners help us program our 4 guys, which is amazing. Marion County Health, Fathers and Families, the Christian Businessmen Association, Eldon Kibbe, We work with the Recycle Force. We work with a number of different agencies. The Federal Credit Union that's right down the street, they help us program these guys to the point where we are just able to be the church. Because I think that's what we can do. And for us to just try to recreate systems that are already in the neighborhood just seem really selfish to me.
Yes.
Because we could do everything, but we are building relationships. And what's amazing about the partners that we have is they feel privileged to be part of these men's rehabilitation because it's intentional and allows for great things to happen. And we're seeing God do tremendous things as we try to figure out, make mistakes, and strive to create a house that is a refuge for these men. And our hope and prayer is that as we graduate guys, they become a generation of godly men for this neighborhood to the point where they don't run away from the problems of the neighborhood, but they actually have figured out how to live life in the midst of the brokenness of our neighborhood and then become godly men that would really transform this neighborhood to be what God intended it to be.
I want to ask you a question that has a yes or no answer, and I want just a yes or no answer. Should the church be the church, or should the church be a nonprofit? Well, that's not a yes or no.
That's not a yes or no.
But just give me the answer to that from your perspective.
The church needs to be the church. Yeah. Have we set up a nonprofit? We've set up a community development corporation. And the reality is, in the government system, and in the funder system too, and we don't do things for funding. Like we will never take money that has restrictions to the mission because we are a church-based nonprofit, but we are called to be the church. And the best way we can also separate some legality pieces and maybe some liability pieces is we have set up a community development corporation, but the primary focus of who we are is the church, and we will always be the church. But these initiatives, play and reentry, are all through our CDC, and we desire that it would be a community development model around the church to allow true transformation to happen and kingdom to happen.
We just have a minute or two left. So if there was something that you wanted to desperately communicate with everybody that's going to hear this from here on out, what would you say at the end of this broadcast today?
First of all, we covet your prayers. We deal with a level of brokenness that breaks my heart deeply. And this is a underserved, if we could use the word forgotten, neighborhood for decades. And the Church of Jesus Christ needs to come around and see that this is not the case for the long haul. And that it is not forgotten. And so I think prayer first, but secondly, if there are people who are interested in urban ministry and coming in the context of an inner-city ministry and the chaos of it, Brookside is a safe place to do that. And we want to partner with people that are serious about kingdom building and that can bring their gifts, because a lot of it is based on relationship, empowering those who have no idea the hope of not only the gospel, but maybe the hope of what they could be because of the circumstances and situations that they're in. And we want to be a catalyst for disciples of Christ who are willing to deny themselves in the process and being sanctified in the process to come down and partner with us in these initiatives, because we desire to see a semblance of the kingdom of God continue as we walk forward in this ministry.
HB, this sounds like it's changed the whole dynamic of mission trips, man.
Oh my God, this is unbelievable. I mean, this is exactly the
what we
the
should be
heart
doing.
Of what we this is at the heart of what Radio Next is designed to be, and I just thank you for doing what you're doing in that community, and we definitely will be in touch.
Awesome.
Getting ready for the 10-point coalition.
Yes, sir.
You hit another one. You got 2 homers today, brother.
Excellent. We're glad to
smack
do it.
2 out the park. Dr. Mark Eckel, you know you are my brother from
Yes,
another
sir.
mother, and I appreciate you. And we'll be talking to you again next week, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Warp and Woof Radio, right here on the Cold Groove site. And stay tuned. 10-point coalition, community voice coming up right at the top of the hour. Got some brand new music coming up, a concert that we'll be doing. In the Moment Band is who you'll be listening to next here on Radio Next. I love you.